The chase begins. Ziroc's hands gripped the control panel as his ship shot through the dark void of space. His heart pounded inside his chest. The alarm lights blinked red, warning him that his engines were close to overheating. He didn't care. He had to escape. His ship, a sleek, silver craft built for speed, was the pride of his people. The Xcelerians were known across the galaxy for their advanced technology, their fast ships, and their ability to outrun anything. No species had ever caught Xcelerian in open space. But tonight, someone was trying. Ziroc glanced at his scanners. A single ship was behind him. It was gaining on him. Fast. His black eyes narrowed as he studied the readings. A human ship. His blood turned cold. "This is impossible," he muttered. "Humans can't be this fast." Ziroc had heard of them before. A young species, aggressive and unpredictable, but their technology was nowhere near Xcelerian level. Their ships were slow. Their tactics were basic. Yet, somehow, one of them was right behind him, closing the distance. He slammed a button, activating his ship's hyperthrusters. The engines roared as his craft shot forward, faster than before. Stars blurred past. He was confident this would be enough. No ship had ever matched Xcelerian hyperspeed. Then he looked at his scanners again. The human ship was still there. Ziroc's breath caught in his throat. That was impossible. No species, no ship, no force in the galaxy could keep up with a Xcelerian in a chase. And yet, the human was gaining. Sweat trickled down the side of his face. He adjusted the ship's course, diving into an asteroid field. Giant, floating rocks drifted through space like silent predators. It was a dangerous move. One mistake, and his ship would be smashed into pieces. But right now, he had no choice. He weaved through the massive asteroids, twisting and turning at impossible angles. The metal of his ship groaned as he pushed it beyond its limits. He took a sharp turn, barely squeezing through a narrow gap between two massive boulders. For a moment, he felt relief. No one could follow him through this. Then his scanner beeped. The human ship was still behind him, and it wasn't slowing down. Ziroc's fingers tightened around the controls. He didn't understand. How was this possible? Was their ship more advanced than he thought? Were humans more skilled pilots than he had been told? Or was this human just different? He shook the thought away and focused. If speed wouldn't save him, he had to try something else. He activated his cloaking device. His ship shimmered and vanished from sight. Finally, he could breathe. The human wouldn't be able to track him now. No scanner in the galaxy could detect a cloaked Xcelerian ship. For a few moments, all was silent. Then, a voice crackled through his ship's communicator. "Nice trick," a deep, confident voice said. "But I can still see you." Ziroc's heart stopped. No, that wasn't possible. A second later, a bright red warning flashed across his screen. A missile had locked onto his ship. His eyes widened in horror. His mind screamed at him to move, to do something. He slammed the thrusters again, breaking into a sudden dive. The missile followed, chasing him like a predator hunting its prey. Ziroc twisted and spun, trying to shake it off. The missile was fast, but not faster than him. He performed a risky maneuver, using the gravity of a nearby planet to slingshot himself out of range. For a moment, the missile lost its lock. It drifted off course and exploded into the planet's atmosphere. Ziroc gasped, his body shaking. That was too close. He had never been hunted like this before. Who was this human? He had to know. He pressed a button, hacking into the enemy ship's identification codes. The pilot's name flashed across the screen. Captain Reynolds. The name meant nothing to him, but Ziroc could feel something unsettling in his chest. This human wasn't just chasing him. He was playing with him. Ziroc's species had always believed they were the fastest, the most superior in space. But tonight, for the first time in his life, Ziroc felt something alien to him. Fear. And as he looked at his scanners again, watching the human ship still gaining on him, he knew one terrible truth. There was no outrunning this hunter. The human hunter. Zurach's breathing was shallow, his hands damp against the sleek control panel. His body, conditioned for high-speed maneuvers and endurance, should not have been feeling this much stress. Yet here he was, on the run, and losing. It defied everything he had ever known. Tellurians were the fastest pilots in the galaxy. Their ships were engineered with precision, their tactics unmatched. Yet despite every maneuver, every burst of speed, every desperate trick, the human ship was still behind him, closer than ever. It was unnatural. It was terrifying. The name he had extracted from the enemy ship's data, Captain Reynolds, meant nothing to him. But right now, it might as well have been a death sentence. For the first time in his life, Zurach felt hunted. The predator behind the chase. Inside the pursuing ship, Captain Reynolds leaned back in his seat, completely relaxed. The glow of his ship's display screens cast a faint reflection in his sharp, focused eyes. The Solarian was good, damn good. His movements were quick, calculated, almost instinctive. But that didn't matter, because Reynolds had already won. He had studied Solarians. They were built for speed, but not endurance. Their ships burned hot, used too much energy too quickly. They were sprinters, not long-distance hunters. Humans, though. Humans didn't sprint. They chased. And they never stopped. A grin tugged at Reynolds' lips as he adjusted the ship's trajectory. Come on, alien. You're running out of moves. Zurach, of course, couldn't hear him. But he didn't need to. Because deep down, he already knew. A desperate gamble. Zurach's mind raced. He needed a way out. His cloaking had failed. His hyperspeed had failed. His best tricks had failed. So he did something no Solarian would ever dare to do. He stopped running. Instead of speeding ahead, he slammed his engines into reverse. His ship jerked backward, a dangerous maneuver that sent waves of stress through his hull. A normal pilot would have been crushed by the force of such a sudden deceleration. But Zurach wasn't normal. The human ship shot past him at incredible speed, and for a single, perfect moment, Zurach had the advantage. His weapons locked onto the human craft. He fired. Twin plasma bolts tore through space. The energy projectiles screamed toward the human ship. Direct hit. The explosion was blinding. Zurach shielded his eyes as fire and metal erupted in all directions. His sensors flickered, struggling to adjust to the sudden burst of heat. He exhaled sharply. It was over. Or so he thought. Humans don't die that easily. A shadow moved in the smoke. Zurach's eyes widened. His scanners flickered back to life. And his heart nearly stopped. The human ship was still intact. Scared, battered, but still there. And still moving. A metallic voice crackled through his communicator, laced with amusement. Nice trick. Before Zurach could react, his own ship lurched violently. The force of an impact sent him flying forward, his control panel sparking from the sudden overload. The human ship had rammed into him. Zurach struggled to steady himself as warning lights flashed violently across his screen. His ship's shields were down, his energy reserves dropping rapidly. He had made a mistake, a terrible mistake. He had given the human a challenge. And humans love challenges. The final warning. Zurach gritted his teeth, forcing his ship back into motion. He couldn't afford another mistake. If the human wanted a fight, fine. Solarians were not just fast. They were warriors. He rerouted power to his weapons and prepared to strike again. But before he could fire, Reynolds' voice came through the comms again. Stop running. You can't win. Zurach let out a low growl. I will not be hunted like prey. A chuckle came through the speaker. It was calm. Too calm. You already are. Zurach's grip on the controls tightened. For the first time in his life, he realized speed wouldn't save him. Because speed didn't matter when your enemy never stopped chasing. Desperate moves. Ziroc's fingers trembled over the controls. The situation had spiraled out of control. His sleek Silurian ship, a machine built for speed and stealth, had been outmatched by a species that should have been too primitive to even catch up to him. But this human, Captain Reynolds, he wasn't just chasing Ziroc. He was toying with him. That wasn't supposed to happen. Silurians were the hunters. Their speed, their technology, their unmatched maneuvering. These things were supposed to make them untouchable. Yet, here he was, running for his life. And worse, it wasn't working. The unstoppable pursuer. Reynolds leaned forward in his pilot's seat, eyes locked on his target. The alien had finally stopped running. Good. He was getting tired. That was the thing about speed. It only mattered in short bursts. If you kept pushing without a plan, eventually, you burned out. And humans didn't burn out. They endured. Reynolds had studied countless alien pilots. Most of them made the same mistake. They thought victory was about being faster. But the real trick, victory was about knowing when to wait. Ziroc had burned through too much energy, made too many desperate maneuvers. His ship's systems were failing. And now it was time to end the chase. Reynolds activated his ship's targeting system. A soft beep confirmed what he already knew. The alien was out of options. But then, something changed. A suicide move. Ziroc took a deep breath. He had one last chance. It was dangerous, insane, and almost impossible. But if he failed, the human would capture him or kill him. Neither was acceptable. His ship's AI chirped a warning. The human had locked onto him again. There was no way to escape. But he wasn't trying to escape anymore. He was going to turn the tables. Ziroc suddenly killed his engines. Reynolds blinked. What the hell? The Silurian ship, which had been moving at incredible speed, came to a sudden, unnatural stop. A full stop in open space. No species in the galaxy would do this. No pilot in their right mind would do this. Space battles weren't meant to be fought while standing still. Reynolds reacted instinctively, jerking his ship to avoid collision. But the moment he did, Ziroc struck. His ship's side thrusters roared to life, spinning his vessel at an impossible angle. In one fluid motion, he fired his plasma cannons directly at Reynolds' engines. Two searing blasts of white-hot energy streaked toward the human ship. Direct hit. The human ship rocked violently, flames bursting from the rear thrusters. Ziroc's breathing was heavy, his mind racing. Had he done it? Had he finally? Not bad. A voice crackled through his ship's speakers. Ziroc's blood ran cold. The human was still alive. The trap within the trap. The smoke cleared, revealing Reynolds' ship, damaged, but still moving. How? Ziroc checked his scanners. His plasma shots had hit perfectly. The human's engines should have been crippled. But the ship's backup thrusters had already activated. The human had been prepared. He had let Ziroc take the shot. The realization hit like a hammer. Ziroc hadn't set a trap. He had walked into one. Reynolds' voice came through the speakers again. Calm. Almost amused. Good move, alien. But now it's my turn. Before Ziroc could react, something slammed into his ship. The unseen weapon. Ziroc's cockpit rattled violently. His ship's AI blared an emergency warning. Magnetic tether engage. A gravitational lock had latched onto his vessel, yanking him toward the human ship like a predator dragging its prey. Ziroc's eyes widened in horror. The human hadn't just been chasing him. He had been waiting for him to fight back. And now, he was reeling him in like a caught animal. Ziroc thrashed against the controls, but it was useless. The energy field held him tight, pulling him closer and closer. For the first time in his life, Ziroc felt something his kind had never known. Powerlessness. A final, desperate act. He had only one chance left. As his ship was pulled toward the humans, he rerouted every last drop of energy to his weapons. If he was going down, he would take Reynolds with him. But just as he was about to fire, his entire ship went dark. The human's last words. Zurak stared at the dead control panel in horror. His weapons were disabled. His thrusters were offline. His ship was completely shut down. Reynolds' voice came through the speakers one last time, smooth and controlled. "You fought well." A pause. "But the hunt is over." Zurak's ship was now locked in the human's hold. He had lost. And for the first time in Solarian history, a human had caught one. The ambush. Zurak sat frozen in his cockpit, his dark eyes locked on the flickering emergency lights across his control panel. Everything was dead. His ship, once the fastest in the galaxy, now drifted helplessly in space, trapped in the human's grasp. His fingers hovered over the controls, but he already knew the truth. There was no escape. The weight of defeat. A Solarian had never been caught before. Never. His people were the fastest, the most untouchable pilots in the universe. Yet somehow, this human had done the impossible. And worse, he had done it with patience. Humans weren't faster. They weren't more advanced. But they were relentless. Zurak clenched his jaw, forcing himself to breathe. This wasn't over. It couldn't be. His species had a saying. A Solarian is only dead when he stops moving. And Zurak was not dead yet. Inside the hunter's ship. On board the human ship, Captain Reynolds watched his prize with sharp, calculating eyes. The Solarian's vessel hung motionless within his magnetic tether. The hunt was over, but something told him the alien wasn't done fighting yet. Reynolds respected that. Solarians were arrogant, overconfident, but damn, they were skilled. Zurak had pushed him harder than most pilots ever had. The alien had fought like a cornered animal. Now he was the animal in a cage. Reynolds exhaled slowly. Time to see if this one had any bite left. He opened a direct communication channel. "Zurak, I assume." There was silence for a moment. Then the alien's voice crackled through. "You already know who I am." Reynolds smirked. Good. The alien still had fight left in him. The counterattack. Zurak kept his face unreadable as he listened to the human's voice. Calm, steady, confident. This human knew exactly what he was doing. But so did Zurak. He tapped into his ship's backup systems. They were fried, but not completely useless. If he could override the lockdown on his weapons, he might get one last shot. Reynolds' voice came again. "Your ship is done, alien. No weapons, no engines, no escape." Zurak almost smirked. "That's what you think." His fingers flew across the emergency controls. Silent commands flashed through the system, rerouting all remaining energy to a single function. A short-range EMP pulse. It wouldn't be strong enough to disable the human ship completely, but it might break the magnetic tether, just long enough. Zurak braced himself and activated the pulse. The Great Escape, or not. A blinding wave of blue energy burst from his ship. The human's vessel shuddered as sparks exploded across its hull. The magnetic tether flickered, then failed. Zurak was free. He slammed the emergency thrusters, launching his ship into a wild spin. He had only seconds before the human regained control. He had to get out of range. Fast. For the first time in what felt like hours, a surge of hope shot through him. He was going to make it. Then his ship stopped moving. Zurak's heart dropped. He checked his screens. His thrusters had failed again. The human ship had already reactivated the tether. The escape had failed. The human's final move. A voice crackled through his comms again, this time with amusement. "Nice try," Reynolds said, "but I was expecting that." Zurak's fists clenched. This human, he wasn't just skilled, he was prepared. Reynolds continued, his voice calm. "I figured you'd try a pulse. That's why I installed a secondary lock. You were free for exactly 2 seconds before I pulled you back. Ziroc's breathing slowed. He had lost. This time, there was no escape. A choice to make. Reynolds didn't waste time. You've got 2 options, Ziroc. His voice was steady. I can drag you in and lock you up. Or we can talk. Ziroc hesitated. Talk. What kind of hunter offered his prey a conversation? But then he realized something. If the human had wanted him dead, he would already be dead. Maybe this wasn't just a hunt. Maybe it was something more. Ziroc exhaled, his pride burning inside him. But right now, pride wouldn't save him. Slowly, he reached for the comm switch. And for the first time in Xelarian history, a captured pilot answered his hunter's call. The truth about humans. Ziroc sat in his cockpit, staring at the flickering screen of his dead ship. He had never lost before. Never been caught. Never been forced into submission. And yet here he was, trapped in a human's grip. The magnetic tether held his vessel firmly, rendering him completely powerless. His weapons were offline. His thrusters were dead. His ship, once the fastest in the galaxy, had become nothing more than dead weight. And the worst part, the human hadn't even broken a sweat. A conversation between enemies. Ziroc's jaw tightened as he finally activated the communication link. If the human wanted to talk, fine. But he wasn't going to beg. The screen flickered, and there he was. Captain Reynolds. The human sat casually in his chair, one arm resting on the controls, the other hand holding a steaming cup of what Ziroc assumed was some kind of human beverage. Ziroc's sharp black eyes narrowed. The human was relaxed. Too relaxed. You're calmer than I expected, Ziroc said, his voice clipped. Reynolds sipped his drink before responding. Because I've already won. The words sent a spark of anger through Ziroc's chest, but he buried it. Control. Patience. Those were the only weapons he had left. If you're going to kill me, do it, Ziroc said. Reynolds chuckled. Kill you? No, that would be a waste. Ziroc stiffened. A waste. His species had been at war before. When a hunter captured prey, they finished the job. There was no hesitation. No games. But humans, they didn't hunt like the Xelarians. They hunted for different reasons. Why humans never stop? Reynolds leaned forward, setting his drink aside. His expression changed. The amusement was gone. You think this is just about speed, don't you? Ziroc hesitated. That's what matters in a chase. Reynolds shook his head. No, that's what matters to you, not to us. The words made Ziroc frown. His mind flashed back to the chase, the impossible speed, the relentless pursuit, the way Reynolds never stopped coming. What was it? What made humans so different? Reynolds studied him for a moment, then spoke. Tell me, Ziroc, how do Xelarians hunt? Ziroc crossed his arms. He didn't like being interrogated, but he answered anyway. We strike fast. Overwhelm the target before they can react. Speed is survival. Reynolds nodded. Exactly. You hunt like a predator that relies on quick kills. If the hunt lasts too long, you burn out. You need the victory to come fast. Ziroc frowned. And humans don't. Reynolds smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Humans don't hunt like that. We hunt through exhaustion. Ziroc's stomach twisted. We're persistence hunters, Reynolds continued. Do you know what that means? Ziroc had studied human history, but it didn't make sense. Their technology was primitive. Their bodies were weak. How had they become dominant on their homeworld? Reynolds leaned back. We don't rely on speed. We rely on endurance. Other species sprint. We chase until you can't run anymore. Ziroc stiffened. He understood now. It wasn't about being the fastest. It was about lasting the longest. A species built to chase. Reynolds continued. 1,000 years ago, before humans had ships, before we had cities, before we had anything, we hunted by running. Ziroc listened in silence. We would find prey and chase it, Not for minutes. Not for hours. For days. Xerox's fingers curled into fists. Days. We ran down creatures stronger than us, faster than us. They would sprint away, thinking they escaped. But we kept coming. Always coming. Xerox's chest felt tight. This is why I lost. Reynolds' voice was calm, almost casual. We don't stop, Xerox. Not when we're tired. Not when we're bleeding. Not when we're dying. Xerox swallowed hard. That's why you never stood a chance. A new kind of fear. Silence filled the comms. For the first time, Xerox truly understood. His species had been arrogant, thinking speed was the only thing that mattered. But humans didn't run to escape. They ran to break their enemies. And it worked, because here he was, broken. Xerox's head dropped slightly, his mind racing. He had never feared another species before. But humans, they were terrifying. A choice that changes everything. Reynolds watched him carefully, giving him time to process. He didn't enjoy breaking people, but this lesson was necessary. After a long pause, Xerox finally spoke. His voice was quiet, controlled. What happens now? Reynolds exhaled. He had expected that question. That depends on you. Xerox's dark eyes lifted. You can keep running, but you'll never win. Xerox's fingers twitched. He had spent his life believing running meant survival. Now, for the first time, he wasn't sure. Reynolds leaned forward. Or, you can learn. You can fight with us instead of against us. Xerox stared at him. You want me to work for you? Reynolds smirked. You've got talent. You just don't know how to use it yet. A long silence stretched between them. Xerox closed his eyes. He had a choice. He could reject the offer, stay loyal to his people. But if he did, he would lose. Again and again. Or he could do the unthinkable. He could stop running and start chasing. The decision. Xerox took a deep breath. Then he did something no Xilarian had ever done. He spoke one simple word. Teach me. Reynolds smiled. Now that's more like it. The final confrontation. Xerox had never trusted anyone outside his species. Xilarians were proud, independent, and superior in speed. They didn't bow. They didn't submit. They didn't need help. And yet here he was, a captured pilot, a lost chase, a decision that defied everything he had ever believed. For the first time in his life, he had asked for guidance, from a human, no less. The realization burned in his chest like fire, but it also awakened something new, something dangerous, a hunger, a need to understand, a need to become better. And if that meant learning from a human, then so be it. Boarding the enemy ship. Xerox's ship shuddered as the human's magnetic tether pulled it in, locking it onto a docking platform. The control panel flickered as an external override forced his cockpit to unlock. The doors hissed open. Xerox took a slow breath before stepping out. His boots clanked against unfamiliar metal as he entered the human ship. The air smelled different, sharper, heavier, mixed with something chemical. He was greeted by silence. The hallway stretched before him, illuminated by dim overhead lights. There were no guards, no weapons aimed at him. No threats. Xerox frowned. His people would never have allowed a captured enemy to walk freely. Was this a mistake? A trap? Or something else? Footsteps echoed ahead. Reynolds appeared from the shadows, standing tall and composed. Unarmed. Unafraid. Xerox's instincts screamed at him. A true hunter never let their prey get this close. But Reynolds wasn't afraid because, in his mind, Xerox wasn't prey anymore. A different kind of fight. Come with me, Reynolds said simply, turning on his heel and walking down the corridor. Xerox hesitated for half a second before following. His sharp eyes scanned every inch of the human's vessel, noting the pathways, the exits, the possible weaknesses. Reynolds led him into what appeared to be a combat training room. The walls were lined with weapons, both familiar and alien. The floor was smooth metal, clearly reinforced. This was a place built not for war, but for preparation. Reynolds stopped in the center of the room and turned to face him. "Show me what you've got." Zirac stiffened. "You want me to fight you?" Reynolds smirked. "No. I want you to stop running." The word struck Zirac harder than he expected. His fists clenched. This was a test. Not of speed, not of technology. A test of something deeper. And for the first time, Zirac wasn't sure if he could pass it. The unlearned lesson. Zirac moved first. Fast, precise, deadly. His body was built for speed, for efficiency. He lunged toward Reynolds, striking like a blade. But Reynolds was ready. He dodged. Just barely, moving with an ease that suggested he had expected this exact attack. Zirac didn't slow. He pivoted, throwing another strike, then another. His movements blurred, faster than any human should be able to react to. And yet, Reynolds blocked every single one. Not with speed, not with power, with patience. Zirac's attacks grew sharper, more desperate, more aggressive. And still, Reynolds dodged, waiting, watching, studying, waiting for Zirac to burn out. Then, Reynolds moved. His counterattack was devastatingly simple. A single, well-placed step. A sudden shift in weight. An opening. Before Zirac could react, Reynolds trapped his wrist, twisted, and sent him crashing to the ground. Zirac's back hit the metal floor with a brutal impact. The fight was over. The difference between them. Zirac lay there, breathing heavily. His chest rose and fell, his mind racing with frustration and disbelief. He had lost. Again. Reynolds knelt beside him, staring down at him with the same calm confidence as before. But this time, there was no mockery in his eyes. Only understanding. "You're fast," Reynolds admitted. "Faster than me. Faster than almost anyone I've ever faced." Zirac gritted his teeth. "Then why did I lose?" Reynolds leaned closer. "But speed alone doesn't win fights. Endurance does. Patience does. Knowing when to strike does." Zirac's vision swam. Everything he had been taught was wrong. His people didn't fight like this. They struck first. They won fast. But what happened when fast wasn't enough? A new path. Reynolds stood up, offering a hand. Zirac stared at it. For a long time, he had believed humans were inferior. He had believed they were reckless, primitive, lucky. But luck didn't explain this. Luck didn't explain how a slower species had outmatched him. Zirac reached up, hesitated, then finally, for the first time, accepted help from a human. Reynolds pulled him to his feet, his grip strong but steady. Zirac looked into the human's eyes and saw something unexpected. Respect. The final choice. Reynolds clapped him on the shoulder. "Now you get it. Speed isn't the answer. The chase doesn't end when you get tired. It ends when you decide you won't stop." Zirac took a deep breath. He had spent his whole life running. Maybe it was time to stop. Maybe it was time to learn what made humans so different. He straightened his back, meeting Reynolds' gaze. "Teach me more." A slow, knowing smile spread across Reynolds' face. "Oh, don't worry, alien. This is just the beginning." The lesson learned. Zirac had spent his entire life believing in one truth: the fastest always wins. It had been the foundation of his people's philosophy, their battle strategies, their very way of life. Silurians were not warriors in the traditional sense. They didn't need to be. They were untouchable, or so he had thought. Now, standing inside a human warship, his body aching from the fight, his mind spinning from the truth he had just learned, he saw things differently. Speed alone hadn't saved him. It never would. Because humans didn't chase to catch. They chased to break. And now, Zirac had a choice. Would he keep running? Or would he learn how to chase? The first true lesson. Reynolds paced in front of him, arms crossed, watching. The human's expression wasn't arrogant or mocking. It was expectant. He had seen the moment Zurak had realized the truth. Now he was waiting for what came next. "So," Reynolds finally said, breaking the silence, "you understand now." Zurak exhaled. His pride still stung from the fight, from the chase, from the realization that everything he had believed in was wrong. But he wasn't going to deny it. He gave a short nod. "I do." Reynolds grinned. "Good. Now, let's see what you can do with that knowledge." Training begins. Zurak expected Reynolds to launch into combat drills immediately, to teach him new fighting techniques, to show him how to counter human tactics. But instead, the first lesson was running. Not a sprint, not a chase, a long, exhausting, never-ending run through the narrow corridors of the ship. "What is this?" Zurak growled, his legs already burning after an hour. Reynolds jogged beside him, breathing steady. "It's what you never had to do before." Zurak clenched his jaw, but kept moving. It didn't take long for exhaustion to set in. Silurians weren't built for endurance. Their bodies burned fuel fast. Every muscle in his body screamed for rest, for stillness. But Reynolds never slowed. Even after 2 hours, even after 3, he just kept going. Zurak finally collapsed, gasping for air, his body shaking from the strain. Reynolds stopped beside him, arms folded. "That's why you lost." Zurak glared up at him, but there was no anger in it, just understanding. He had never trained for endurance, never trained to fight through exhaustion. His body had been built for quick bursts of speed, but that was useless when the enemy never stopped coming. For the first time, Zurak realized something terrifying. The chase had never been about speed. It had been about who could keep going the longest. And in that battle, humans always won. Adaptation is survival. The training continued. Zurak learned that every movement mattered. That energy had to be rationed, not wasted. That sometimes, the best way to win was to let the enemy think they were winning. He sparred with Reynolds again. And this time, he didn't go for speed. This time, he waited. He controlled his breathing. He planned. He studied. And when he finally attacked, he struck with patience, not panic. Reynolds grinned as he barely dodged the hit. "Now you're getting it." The final test. The true challenge came days later. Reynolds led him to the bridge and gestured at the ship's radar. "Your final test isn't in here." Zurak frowned. "Then where?" Reynolds smirked. "Out there." Zurak's heart pounded as he saw a second ship approaching. Another Xilarian vessel. His own people. Face to face with his past. The moment his people realized he was aboard a human warship, they would label him a traitor. They wouldn't listen to explanations. They wouldn't ask questions. They would chase him. And they wouldn't stop. The irony wasn't lost on him. Now he was the prey. Reynolds looked at him carefully. "You know what's coming." Zurak clenched his fists. "They won't let me go. I am compromised in their eyes." Reynolds nodded. "So what are you going to do?" Zurak's breath slowed. For the first time in his life, he didn't think about running. He thought about the chase, and what it truly meant to hunt. Zurak stepped forward, his mind sharp, his muscles steady. "I'm going to stop running." Reynolds' grin widened. Now that's the right answer. The hunter becomes the hunted. The Xilarian ship hailed them. Zurak answered. A familiar voice filled the air. "Zurak, you are ordered to stand down. We are bringing you in." Zurak stood tall. "No, you are not." Silence. Then, the chase began. But this time, Zurak wasn't running. He was leading. His ship moved not as prey, but as predator. For the first time, Xilarian chose to chase, and the galaxy would never be the same.